Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit. It's Weekend Book Review. And today, we're diving deep, really deep, into online privacy with a book that everyone has been talking about, Tor by Ben Collier. It came out just this year.
Yeah. Hot off the presses.
Yeah. And this isn't your typical, dark web sensationalism. This book goes way beyond those headlines. It really digs into the history of Tor, the technical side of things, and the human stories, too, which I think is what makes it so fascinating.
Tell you the people behind it.
So Ben Collier, he didn't mess around with this research. He really went in, spent years going through archives. He analyzed thousands of pages of documents, interviewed over 30 people, key players in the Tor community, developers, maintainers, you name it.
Yeah, the whole spectrum.
And right off the bat, he introduces this really interesting concept, privacy worlds. It's how people view and interact with Tor. There are these distinct perspectives. It's like looking at the same thing, but through different lenses.
Right.
Each one revealing a different aspect of it.
That's interesting.
So he breaks it down into three main groups: the engineers, the maintainers, and the activists. And what's really striking is how each group has a different focus, a different why behind their involvement with Tor. The engineers, for example, the ones who designed and built this incredible technology, they're all about structural change. They really see privacy as this fundamental right that's being eroded by, mass surveillance.
Yeah.
And they're building tools like Tor to fight back.
Yeah.
Like, think about Roger Dingledine and Nick Mathewson.
Yeah.
They're brilliant. They're the ones behind Tor's core architecture. And for them, it's all about creating this more private internet. By design, right? They're using technical solutions like onion routing to make it much harder to track online activity. It's like they're rewiring the internet to give individuals control over their data.
Yeah.
Then you have the maintainers.
Right.
These are the unsung heroes who keep the whole Tor network running every single day. They're not necessarily focused on the big picture structural changes. They're more concerned with the nuts and bolts. Keep the lights on. Making sure it's accessible to all the millions of users worldwide. And their motivations are all over the place. Some of them love the tech, some believe in freedom of speech, some just don't trust authority. But what unites them is this dedication to the service itself, to making sure this anonymity network is reliable and robust.
Right.
And then you have the activists.
Yeah.
They see Tor as this powerful tool for social and political change. They're using it to fight censorship, to organize protests, protect whistleblowers, to empower marginalized communities all over the world.
Makes sense.
Think about the Arab Spring. Tor played a big role there. It let people communicate and organize under incredibly oppressive regimes.
That's pretty amazing.
And for these activists, Tor is more than just technology, right? It's this weapon in the fight for digital freedom, for human rights. They're pushing the boundaries of what Tor can do, advocating for its use, and really challenging the status quo. So you have these three privacy worlds all interacting. Sometimes they're working together, sometimes they're bumping heads.
Right.
But it really shows the complexity of online privacy in the 21st century. Now, to understand how we got here, to Tor as it is today, we've got to go back to its roots, back to the 1990s. And this is kind of unexpected, but it started at the U.S. Naval Research Lab.
The NRL.
Yeah. It might seem strange, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't think the Navy would be that into anonymity.
That a technology all about anonymity and privacy came from a government agency, known for secrecy. But that's what makes Tor's story so interesting. So the NRL, they had this problem. They need to figure out how to protect sensitive government communications from prying eyes, especially as the internet was becoming more and more interconnected.
Right.
And their solution was onion routing, this technique that bounces your data through multiple layers of encryption and a network of servers. It makes it really difficult to track where the communication's coming from or where it's going. It's like sending a letter through a bunch of people, each one putting it in another envelope with a different address. By the time it gets to the final destination, it's almost impossible to trace back to the sender. So the NRL, they saw this as a way to safeguard government secrets in the digital age. They probably didn't realize that their invention would one day be used to challenge government power and empower individuals around the world.
Yeah, ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's where the cypherpunks come in. These were activists and cryptographers, deeply skeptical of authority. They were passionate about privacy and freedom online. And they saw onion routing's potential, not just for governments, but for everyone. They thought this could be a tool for protecting individuals from surveillance, from censorship, from oppression. And the cypherpunks, they really pushed the NRL to release onion routing to the public. They argued this should be a tool for the people, not just governments.
Makes sense.
It was about leveling the playing field, giving individuals the same protection that governments enjoyed. And so they set the stage for what Tor would become, this global anonymity network. So we have this amazing mix, government research and cypherpunk activism, which laid the foundation for Tor. But it still had a long way to go before it was the user-friendly, accessible tool it is today.
Right.
And that's where Roger Dingledine and Nick Mathewson come in. They took onion routing and turned it into Tor. They founded the Tor project in the early 2000s with the goal of making this anonymity network robust and easy to use. They knew onion routing alone wasn't enough. They needed to build this whole ecosystem around it. The network of relays, the browser, and the community of volunteers to maintain and support it all. And they had to tackle some serious technical challenges, designing for anonymity in a world where adversaries are getting more and more sophisticated.
Right.
They weren't just dealing with casual snoopers. They were thinking about powerful entities with tons of resources, global reach. They even came up with this term global adversary to describe this attacker that could theoretically monitor traffic across the entire internet is a daunting task. But Dingledine and Mathewson, they were determined to build something that could withstand these attacks. And they did it by focusing on decentralization, distributing the network across thousands of volunteer-run relays all over the world. They knew that any central point of control could be a weakness. So they designed Tor to be as resilient as possible, no single point of failure. But as Tor grew in popularity, it started attracting some unwanted attention. The very features that made it so attractive to privacy advocates, journalists, activists, they also made it appealing to those operating in the shadows, which led to the rise of, what we call the dark web.
The underbelly.
With Tor, you can not only browse anonymously, but also host hidden websites, only accessible through the Tor network. These became known as onion services. And let's face it, they opened a bit of a Pandora's box.
Yeah.
Two sides to that coin.
Good and bad.
Right.
On one hand, these onion services provided a haven for whistleblowers, activists, people living under oppressive regimes. They could communicate and collaborate in ways that would have been impossible otherwise. But on the other hand, it created this space where criminal activity could flourish, out of sight of law enforcement, drug markets, stolen data, you name it. It all found a home in these hidden corners of the Tor network. The media, well, they had a field day with this, sensationalizing the dark web, portraying Tor as this tool for criminals and terrorists.
Of course.
Which led to all sorts of misconceptions and fear-mongering. That Tor was inherently dangerous, that it was all about the seedy underbelly of the internet. And the Tor project had this dilemma. How do you counter this negative narrative without compromising the very thing that made Tor so valuable in the first place? Anonymity.
Right. It's a tough one. It's a balancing act they still deal with today, trying to promote the legitimate uses of Tor, while addressing these challenges posed by its darker side. And then, of course, came this huge turning point, something that changed everything for online privacy, the Snowden revelations. In 2013, Edward Snowden, a former NSA contractor, leaked all these classified documents. They revealed just how extensive government surveillance programs were in the U.S. and around the world.
Yeah, it was huge.
It shook everyone up. Confirmed what a lot of folks in the privacy community had suspected for a long time. The governments were collecting massive amounts of data on their citizens, often without their knowledge or consent.
Yeah.
For the Tor project, it was vindication. It proved they'd been right all along about these threats. But it also brought a whole new set of challenges. Suddenly, Tor was front and center. The user base exploded as people all over the world looked for ways to protect their privacy from governments and corporations. This flood of new users brought new demands, new security concerns, and really put the focus on the importance of online privacy in the digital age. The Tor project had to adapt quickly, strengthen their infrastructure, improve security, and find ways to educate a much wider audience about online privacy. Snowden's leaks were a watershed moment, not just for Tor, but for the whole internet. It forced a global conversation about the balance between security and privacy, between what governments could do and what rights individuals had. And as we move further into the 21st century, this conversation only becomes more urgent as technology keeps advancing and the lines between our online and offline lives keep blurring. Tor's story is a glimpse into the future of online privacy. It's a story of innovation, of resilience, of this ongoing struggle to protect our digital freedoms in a world where surveillance is becoming more and more pervasive. But it's also a story of hope, a testament to human ingenuity, and the belief that privacy is not a privilege, it's a fundamental right. So as we keep exploring Collier's book, let's keep these privacy worlds in mind, these different ways of understanding the complexities of Tor and its impact on the world. And remember, Tor's story is still being written. We all have a role to play in what happens next. Now, before we get into the technical nitty-gritty of how Tor actually works, let's take a closer look at this global adversary concept and why it's so central to Tor's design. When the Tor developers set out to build this network, they knew they weren't just dealing with casual snoopers or petty criminals. They were up against some of the most powerful entities in the world, governments, with vast resources, with sophisticated technology, with the ability to monitor internet traffic on a massive scale. They understood that designing for anonymity meant thinking about adversaries who could potentially see everything, who could monitor traffic at any point. This idea of a global adversary became this guiding principle. It made them think outside the box, anticipate threats most people couldn't even imagine. And it led them to decentralization, making the network incredibly distributed, spread across thousands of relays, all independently operated. So it's virtually impossible to control or shut down completely. But it also meant constant innovation, coming up with new techniques to counter evolving threats, always staying one step ahead of anyone trying to undermine Tor's anonymity. So as we go deeper into the technical side of Tor, keep this global adversary in mind. It really highlights the stakes involved, the constant back and forth between those who want to control information and those who are fighting for the freedom to communicate and access information without fear of reprisal. Now, let's get to the heart of Tor, the technology that makes this anonymity network possible.
Right.
At its core, Tor is based on onion routing. It's a technique that disguises your online activity by bouncing your communications through these series of relays, each one adding a layer of encryption.
Okay.
It's like wrapping a message in multiple layers of wrapping paper, each with a different address. As it goes through the network, each relay peels off a layer, revealing only the next destination.
I get it.
And by the time it reaches the final destination, it's almost impossible to trace back to the sender. But onion routing is just one part of it. Tor also uses other tricks, like entry guards and exit nodes, to enhance anonymity further.
Yeah.
Entry guards, those are the first relays your traffic hits when you use Tor. They're chosen randomly, and they change periodically to prevent anyone from tracking your long-term usage. And then there are the exit nodes. These are the last relays in the chain, the ones sending your tracking out to the public internet. Because they're the only point where your traffic is unencrypted. They're a potential weakness. So, Tor uses something called stream isolation, which makes sure different websites you visit are accessed through different exit nodes. So it's harder to link your activity.
Right.
Now, onion routing and these other techniques, they work really well at obscuring your activity. But there's a trade-off. Speed. Bouncing your traffic through multiple relays adds some lag. Tor is going to be slower than browsing directly.
Yeah, you always hear that it's slower.
But for a lot of users, that's a small price to pay. The anonymity and privacy that Tor provides are essential for journalists, activists, whistleblowers, anyone who needs to protect their identity and their communications. And as surveillance gets more and more sophisticated, Tor's role in safeguarding our digital freedoms is becoming even more crucial. Now let's talk about onion services. Those hidden websites you can only get to through the Tor network.
Yeah, the mysterious hidden services.
Onion services, or hidden services, they're a really interesting and controversial part of Tor. They let anyone host a website that's completely hidden. You can only get to it if you know the address, which is this long, randomly generated string of characters ending in .onion.
Yeah.
Like a secret club with a super secret password. You need to know the right knot to get in. But once you're in, you're shielded from the outside world. Onion services provide a level of anonymity and privacy you just don't get on the regular internet. They're used for all sorts of things. Legitimate stuff like hosting private forums, sharing sensitive information, but also for things that are less than legal. Drug markets, black markets, all that.
The dark side.
The anonymity can be a powerful tool for good. It lets whistleblowers leak information without fear of getting caught. Activists to organize in countries where they'd be silenced. Journalists can communicate securely with their sources. But of course, it also presents challenges for law enforcement, trying to track down criminals who are operating in the shadows.
Right, makes sense.
The whole dark web thing, it's fueled this debate about privacy and security. about individual rights versus preventing crime.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It's a complex issue. There are no easy answers. And it's something we'll keep grappling with as technology keeps changing and the line between online and offline blurs even more. Now, how do these onion services actually work? Instead of traditional IP addresses, which can be traced, onion services use this system of rendezvous points to connect users and websites.
Okay, so it's about making the connection itself anonymous.
Yeah, so when you want to access an onion service, your Tor client sends a message through the network looking for the website's rendezvous point, which is this randomly chosen relay that acts as a middleman.
I see.
And once the connection is made, your traffic goes through a bunch of relays, just like regular browsing with Tor. But the final destination is this hidden onion service, not a publicly known IP address.
Makes sense.
This keeps both the user and the website anonymous, making it super hard to track either one down. But while onion services are good at anonymity, they're not perfect. They have some weaknesses. One is the rendezvous point itself.
Okay.
If someone could compromise that, they could potentially intercept traffic and figure out who's connecting to what. So to reduce this risk, Tor uses introduction points. These are randomly chosen relays that help make the connection between you and the rendezvous point. And by using multiple introduction points and switching them often, Tor makes it a lot harder for anyone to target that rendezvous point and break the anonymity.
Right, so multiple layers of protection.
Another potential problem is the website itself. If it's not set up securely or if it's running vulnerable software, it could be compromised. And that could expose user data. So Tor really encourages onion service operators to use good security practices, strong passwords, keeping software up to date, and avoiding those unnecessary plugins.
Right, it's on them to be secure too.
Now, we often hear about onion services in the context of the dark web and all its illegal activities. But it's important to remember there are plenty of legitimate uses for them. Lots of privacy-focused organizations use them. Individuals who want to protect their communications use them to host websites, forums, chat platforms, all kinds of things, away from surveillance and censorship.
Right.
Journalists use them to talk to sources safely. Whistleblowers can leak info without fear of reprisal, and activists can organize in countries with restrictive internet controls. Onion services are a powerful tool for protecting privacy and free speech in a world where those rights are constantly under threat. Now, let's shift gears and talk about the impact Edward Snowden's revelations had on Tor and the whole privacy community.
Yeah, a turning point for sure.
When he leaked those classified documents in 2013, revealing the extent of government surveillance, it shook everyone to their core.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
It confirmed what a lot of privacy advocates have been saying for years, that governments were collecting vast amounts of data on their citizens, often without their knowledge or consent.
Right.
Snowden's leaks had a huge impact on Tor. The user base exploded overnight. People all over the world started downloading and using the software. It was this sudden realization that online privacy mattered, that what they were doing online was being watched and recorded on a massive scale. But it also created a whole new set of challenges for the Tor project. They had to scramble to handle all these new users, beef up their infrastructure, deal with new security threats as they got more attention from adversaries.
Right.
And they also had to fight against the way Tor was being portrayed in the media.
Yeah, as a tool for criminals.
This narrative that it was all about the dark web. So the Tor project doubled down on their efforts to promote the legitimate uses of Tor. They launched public awareness campaigns, they talked to policymakers, they worked with other privacy organizations, all to push back against government surveillance and to promote a more privacy-respecting internet. The Snowden leaks were a turning point, not just for Tor, but for the entire internet. It forced a global conversation about security and privacy, about the power of governments and the rights of individuals. And that conversation is more important than ever as we go further into the 21st century, as technology keeps evolving, as the lines between online and offline continue to blur. Tor's story, as complex as it is, gives us a window into the future of online privacy. It's a story of innovation, of resilience, of this constant struggle to protect our freedoms in a world of increasingly pervasive surveillance. But it's also a story of hope, a testament to human ingenuity, and to the unwavering belief that privacy is not a privilege, but a right. So as you read Collier's book, keep these different perspectives, these privacy worlds in mind. They help us understand the complexities of Tor and its impact on the world. And remember, Tor's story isn't over yet. We're all part of shaping what it becomes. Now, let's dive into how Tor's very understanding of privacy has changed over time, and how it's navigating the challenges of staying true to its mission in this rapidly changing digital world.
Collier does a fantastic job of tracing how Tor's concept of privacy has evolved. It's gone through different phases, each shaped by internal dynamics within the community and external events.
That's interesting. So it wasn't always the same.
Right, it's evolved.
Yeah.
In the early days, the main focus was on structural change.
Like making the internet itself more private.
Exactly. Building a more private internet by design. The engineers, those driven by the belief that technology could solve these social problems, they were at the forefront, creating tools like onion routing and the Tor network itself. But as Tor grew in popularity, more and more people started using it, and the focus began to shift a bit.
So what did it shift to?
It became more about service provision, the maintainers, those folks working behind the scenes, keeping the network running.
Right.
They became more important. They had to make sure Tor was accessible and reliable for those millions of users all over the world. Their focus was less about the big picture, the structural stuff, and more about the practicality, keeping the lights on, basically, providing a valuable service to anyone who needed it. And then came Snowden. And that brought this renewed focus on the political and social implications of online privacy. The activists, who always saw Tor as this tool for social change, they became even more vocal. They pushed the Tor project to take a more active role in advocating for digital freedom, for human rights. And this shift towards activism, it created some tension within the Tor community. Those focused on the technical side, on providing the service, they had to grapple with what it meant to take a more public stance.
I see. So different priorities coming into play.
Exactly. But it also led to a more nuanced understanding of privacy itself.
Right.
One that recognized how technology, politics, and social justice are all interconnected.
Right. It's not just about the tech itself.
Tor's evolution shows that privacy isn't just a technical problem, it's a human rights issue. It's about freedom of communication, freedom of association, the freedom to express yourself without worrying about being watched or punished. And as we move further into the 21st century, those freedoms are becoming even more important. As technology keeps advancing, as the lines between our online and offline lives blur even more. So as you read Collier's book, think about how Tor's understanding of privacy has changed over time, how those engineers, maintainers, and activists have interacted to shape the project, and how Tor's story reflects this broader struggle to safeguard our digital freedoms in a world where surveillance is becoming more and more pervasive.
That's a lot to think about.
It is, but it's a fascinating journey. Now let's talk about something that might seem a little paradoxical. Tor's relationship with the U.S. government.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It might seem strange that this technology, all about anonymity and privacy, it originated within a government agency, an agency known for secrecy.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a natural fit.
But that's part of what makes Tor's story so intriguing. The U.S. Naval Research Lab, where onion routing was born, they were looking for a way to protect their own communications. They wanted to safeguard government secrets in the digital age. They probably didn't foresee that their creation would be used to challenge government power, to empower individuals all around the world.
Yeah, a bit of irony there.
And over the years, Tor has actually received a lot of funding from different U.S. government agencies.
Really?
Including some involved in promoting democracy and free speech abroad.
Okay.
These agencies, they recognize that in a world with more and more internet censorship, Tor can be a vital tool. It can help activists, journalists, dissidents, all those whose voices are being silenced. It can help them circumvent those restrictions to access information freely. But of course, this funding hasn't been without controversy.
Right, I can imagine.
Some critics say it compromises Tor's independence.
Yeah, it could make it vulnerable to government influence.
And the Tor project has had to walk this tightrope, trying to maintain their commitment to user privacy while also accepting funding from these government agencies that are sometimes engaged in surveillance.
It's a tricky situation for sure.
It highlights how complex navigating online privacy can be, where the lines between good and bad, between those who want to protect privacy and those who want to erode it, they often get blurred. So, as you read Collier's book, think about the implications of this relationship between Tor and the U.S. government. How has it shaped the project? And what does it tell us about the challenges of building and maintaining a tool for privacy in a world where governments are increasingly interested in surveillance and control?
It's a really important question.
It is. Now let's move on to something that's been making waves lately. The emergence of what's sometimes called the crypto bro culture and its influence on the privacy world.
Yes, the crypto world.
The rise of cryptocurrencies, blockchain technology, the Web3 movement, all of that. It's brought a lot of money and energy into the tech scene. And some of that has definitely spilled over into the Tor community. Now, there's some common ground there, the cypherpunk ethos that inspired Tor, the libertarian ideals of a lot of folks in the crypto world, but there are also some big differences.
Right, I can see that.
The cypherpunks, they were driven by this desire for freedom, for social change.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people in the crypto community, they seem more interested in making a quick profit.
That makes sense.
And this has created some tension within the Tor community. Some people see this influx of crypto wealth as a great opportunity. It can mean more funding, more resources for the project.
Yeah.
But others are more cautious. They worry about becoming too close to an industry that's, well, sometimes associated with shady stuff, speculation, scams, and a lack of concern for the social good. They're worried that embracing the crypto revolution could compromise Tor's values,
Yeah.
alienate those who see it as a tool for social justice, not just for personal financial gain. And Collier explores this really well in his book.
Yeah.
He highlights the challenges Tor faces as it tries to navigate this complex world of online privacy where there are all these competing interests. So as you're reading Tor, pay attention to how this crypto bro culture is impacting the project. How's this wave of interest in privacy and decentralization shaping Tor's development? And what does it tell us about the broader landscape of online privacy in a world where technology, finance, and ideology are all intertwined?
Lots to think about.
Now let's step back and look at some of the big themes that emerge from Collier's book and what they tell us about the future of online privacy.
Okay, sounds good.
One of the most striking takeaways is the importance of diversity within the Tor community. The interplay between the engineers, the maintainers, and the activists.
We've been talking about them.
Each with their own unique perspectives, their own motivations. That interplay has been crucial to Tor's success. It's allowed the project to adapt, to balance competing priorities, and to stay relevant in this constantly changing digital world. Another big theme is this ongoing struggle to define what privacy actually means in the digital age.
Yeah, it's a moving target, isn't it?
It is. As technology keeps advancing, the lines between our online and offline lives get blurrier.
Right.
And privacy itself becomes more complex, harder to pin down.
For sure.
Tor's story really highlights the need for constant dialogue, for debating what privacy means, how it should be protected, and what role technology should play.
Right. It's a conversation we need to keep having.
And finally, Collier's book reminds us that this fight for privacy isn't just about technology, it's about people. It's about the rights of individuals to control their own data, to communicate freely, to live their lives without fear of being watched or punished. It's a fight that demands constant vigilance, critical thinking, and a willingness to challenge the way things are. So as you finish reading Tor, think about what role you want to play in shaping the future of online privacy. How can you use your voice, your skills, to promote a more privacy-respecting internet? What can you learn from the Tor community's journey, this long, winding road they've traveled to protect this fundamental right in the digital age?
It's inspiring, really, to see people fighting for something so important.
It is. Now, before we wrap up, I just want to acknowledge the incredible work Ben Collier has done in bringing this story to life. His research, his insights, his writing, they all make Tor a must-read for anyone interested in online privacy, in digital freedom, in the future of the internet. It's a book that will challenge you, it'll make you think, and it'll leave you with a deeper appreciation for how vital it is to protect privacy in a world where it's constantly under threat. So if you haven't already, grab a copy of Tor and dive in. Explore this fascinating and incredibly timely story of one of the most important technologies of our time.
I'm adding it to my list.
As you go down the rabbit hole of online privacy, remember the lessons Tor's story teaches us. Remember the importance of diversity, the need for constant dialogue, and the human element at the heart of this fight. Most importantly, remember that the fight for privacy is a fight worth fighting, and we all have a role to play in shaping a future where our digital freedoms are protected. Now, let's shift gears and talk about one of the most intriguing and controversial aspects of Tor, its role in facilitating access to the dark web.
Ooh, the dark web.
That term that evokes all these images of hidden corners of the internet, accessible only through anonymity networks like Tor, the clandestine marketplaces, shadowy figures, all of that.
Right, it has a certain mystique.
But the reality of the dark web is far more complex than the headlines might lead you to believe.
Yeah, I'm sure it's more than just a haven for criminals.
While it's true that the dark web does host illegal activity, it's also a refuge for whistleblowers, for activists, for journalists, for anyone who needs to communicate and share information securely, anonymously. And Collier explores this duality in his book.
That makes sense.
He shows the potential for harm and the potential for good.
Two sides to every coin.
He dives into the history of onion services, the hidden websites that make up the dark web. He traces their evolution from these obscure technical experiments to platforms for political dissent, for criminal enterprises, for everything in between. He really digs into the ethical dilemmas posed by the dark web. He asks, do the benefits of anonymity outweigh the risks of making illegal activity easier? And he challenges readers to think critically about how technology shapes our understanding of privacy, security, and freedom. So as you read Tor, think about the complexities of the dark web. What are its potential benefits? What are its drawbacks? How does it challenge our traditional ideas of law enforcement, of censorship, of social control? What does it tell us about the evolving relationship between technology and society, and about the human condition itself?
It's a lot to unpack.
It is, but it's a crucial part of the story. Now let's look at some specific examples of how the dark web has been used, both for good and for bad. On the positive side, the dark web has been essential in protecting whistleblowers and activists, giving them a way to communicate securely without fear of being silenced or punished.
Yeah, that makes sense.
For example, WikiLeaks, the website that publishes all of those leaked documents, they've relied heavily on Tor and Onion services to protect their sources, their operations. The dark web has also been used by journalists to connect with sources in countries where there's a lot of censorship. It lets them report on sensitive stuff without putting themselves or their contacts at risk.
Right, it's a lifeline for them.
And it's given activists a platform to organize and mobilize in places where freedom of speech and assembly are restricted.
Yeah, that's powerful.
But of course, there's the flip side. The dark web has also been used for all sorts of criminal activities.
Yeah, the dark side.
Drug trafficking, arms dealing, human trafficking, money laundering, all that. The anonymity that Tor provides can make it really difficult for law enforcement to track down these criminals operating in the shadows, and that's raised concerns about the dark web enabling illegal activity.
Yeah, I can see that being a concern.
It's important to remember, though, the vast majority of Tor users are not criminals. The dark web is just a small fraction of the overall network. But it's there, and it raises these ethical questions about technology's role in both good and bad behavior. It's also led to calls for more regulation, more surveillance of the Tor network, which then raises concerns about privacy and freedom of speech being eroded.
Right, it's a balancing act.
So when you're thinking about the dark web, it's important to weigh those potential benefits against the risks. Is it even possible to create a technology that promotes privacy and freedom without also making it easier for criminal activity to happen? How do we find that balance between security and protecting our fundamental rights?
Yeah, it's a tough question.
Now, let's talk about how the Snowden revelations impacted the dark web and the whole Tor community. When Snowden leaked those documents in 2013, revealing just how extensive government surveillance was,
Yeah, that changed everything.
it confirmed what a lot of people had suspected, that governments were collecting huge amounts of data on their citizens, often without them even knowing. And it had a huge effect on the dark web. User numbers surged.
Right, because people were looking for ways to protect themselves.
Exactly. People turned to Tor and the dark web to shield themselves from this surveillance. They were afraid of their online activity being monitored and collected. But the leaks also led to a crackdown on the dark web by law enforcement.
Makes sense?
Governments wanted to disrupt criminal activity, assert their authority in this new, often lawless digital space. And the Tor project was caught in the middle.
Oh yeah, they would be.
They were facing more scrutiny from both sides, privacy advocates and law enforcement. They had to balance their commitment to user privacy with the need to address concerns about illegal activity, and they had to navigate this complicated political landscape as governments all over the world were grappling with the fallout from Snowden's leaks and this growing demand for online privacy.
So it was a turning point in a lot of ways.
The Snowden revelations were a turning point for the dark web and the Tor community. It forced a reckoning. With the challenges and opportunities of this new digital frontier, they highlighted the importance of anonymity and privacy in the digital age. But they also raised questions about the limits of freedom and the role of technology in shaping our societies. So, as you explore Tor in the dark web in Collier's book, keep the Snowden revelations in mind. How did those leaks change online privacy? What impact did they have on the Tor community and the Tor network? And what can we learn from this pivotal moment in the history of the internet?
Good points.
Now, let's go back to Tor's relationship with the U.S. government. We talked about it a bit earlier, but it's worth digging into further. It might seem counterintuitive, that a technology focused on anonymity and privacy came from a government agency, an agency known for secrecy. But that's what makes Tor's story so fascinating.
Yeah, for sure.
The U.S. Naval Research Lab, where onion routing was first developed, they wanted to protect sensitive government communications, especially as the internet was becoming more and more interconnected. They didn't realize back then that their creation would be used to challenge governments, to empower individuals around the world. And over the years, Tor has received a lot of funding from various U.S. government agencies, including some that promote democracy and freedom of speech in other countries. They recognize that in a world of growing internet censorship, Tor is a valuable tool. It can help activists, journalists, dissidents, all those whose voices are being suppressed. It can help them bypass those restrictions to access information freely. But this funding, it's caused some controversy. Some critics argue that it compromises Tor's independence, that it could make the project vulnerable to government influence. So the Tor project has had to walk this tightrope, balancing their commitment to user privacy while also taking money from agencies that might be engaged in surveillance themselves.
Right, it's a tricky situation.
It shows how complicated navigating the world of online privacy is, where the lines between the good guys and the bad guys, those who want to protect privacy and those who want to erode it, those lines are often blurry. So when you're reading Collier's book, think about the implications of this relationship with the U.S. government. How has it shaped Tor's development? What does it tell us about the challenges of creating and maintaining a tool for privacy when governments are increasingly focused on surveillance and control? Now, let's shift gears and talk about a more recent development that's impacting Tor and the wider privacy community. The rise of the crypto bro culture.
Ah, yes, a crypto world.
Cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, the Web3 movement, they've injected a lot of money and energy into tech. And some of that has inevitably found its way to Tor.
Right, because they share some of the same ideals, right?
There's some overlap between the cypherpunk philosophy that inspired Tor and the libertarian ideals of many of the crypto community. But there's some key differences too.
Okay, I'm curious.
The cypherpunks, they were driven by this desire for freedom, for social change. But a lot of folks in the crypto world seem more focused on making a profit.
That's a different kind of motivation.
And this difference has created some tension within the Tor community. Some people see this influx of crypto wealth as a good thing. It could mean more funding, more resources for the project. But others are worried about getting too close to an industry that's often associated with, well, less than ethical practices, speculation, scams, a lack of concern for the greater good. They worry that embracing this crypto revolution could damage Tor's values, that it could alienate those who see Tor as a tool for social justice, not just for making money.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a concern.
Collier really dives into this tension in his book. He shows the challenges Tor faces as it tries to navigate this complicated world of online privacy, where there are all these competing interests and motivations. So as you read Tor, think about how this crypto bro culture is impacting the project. How is this wave of interest in privacy and decentralization shaping Tor's development? What does it tell us about the broader landscape of online privacy in this world, where technology, finance, and ideology are becoming more and more intertwined?
It's fascinating how all these things are connected.
Now let's step back and consider some of the big themes that emerge from Collier's book and what they tell us about the future of online privacy. One of the most important takeaways is the importance of diversity within the Tor community. The interplay between the engineers, the maintainers, the activists, each group with their own unique perspective and motivation. That interplay has been essential to Tor's success. It's what's allowed the project to adapt to changing circumstances, to balance those competing priorities, and to stay relevant in this rapidly changing digital world.
It's like a microcosm of the internet itself, in a way.
Another big theme is this ongoing struggle to define what privacy actually means in the digital age.
Right, because it's constantly changing.
As technology advances, those lines between our online and offline lives get blurrier and blurrier, and privacy itself becomes more complex, more nuanced.
It's hard to keep up.
Tor's story really highlights how crucial it is to have an ongoing conversation about privacy.
Yeah, a dialogue.
About what it means, how we protect it, and what role technology should play. And finally, Collier's book reminds us that this fight for privacy isn't just about bits and bytes. It's about people. It's about our fundamental rights as individuals. To control our data, to communicate freely, to live our lives without fear of being watched or punished. It's a fight that requires us to be vigilant, to think critically, and to challenge the status quo. So as you finish Tor, think about your role in shaping the future of online privacy. How can you use your voice, your skills, your influence to promote a more privacy-respecting internet? What can we all learn from the Tor community's journey, this long, winding road they've traveled to protect this fundamental right in the digital age?
It's inspiring, really, to see people fighting for something so important.
It is, and it shows how technology is never neutral. It's always reflecting the values, the fears, the aspirations of the people who create it and use it.
Right, and Tor is such a clear example of that. Starting from this Cold War need for secrecy and becoming this tool for individual empowerment in the digital age.
Exactly. But as we've been discussing, that journey hasn't been a straight line. There have been twists and turns, challenges along the way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things that really stuck with me from the book was how Collier describes the evolution of Tor's relationship with the U.S. government. It's this weird mix of support and suspicion, you know?
Yeah, funding on one hand and fear on the other.
Right, because some parts of the government clearly see Tor as a valuable tool, especially for promoting democracy and free speech around the world. They understand that it can be a lifeline for activists and journalists in places where those things are suppressed.
Absolutely. And they put their money where their mouth is.
Right.
Funding Tor projects, recognizing the potential it has to help people whose voices are being silenced.
Yeah. But at the same time, you have the intelligence agencies who naturally see Tors as a potential threat, a tool that can be used for criminal activity, terrorism, all the things they're trying to prevent.
Right. And that puts the Tor project in this really difficult position. How do you accept support from those who believe in your mission, while also guarding against attempts to control or compromise the technology?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance.
Collier talks about how they've tackled this on several fronts. Technically, they're constantly working to strengthen Tor's security, making it harder to exploit or break. But it's also about outreach and education.
Right, getting the word out there.
Working with law enforcement, talking to policymakers, really trying to change the narrative around Tor, showing that while it can be misused, its core purpose is about empowering individuals, protecting their right to communicate freely.
It's an ongoing effort, for sure.
And then, of course, you had the Snowden revelations, which really threw a wrench into things. Suddenly, Tor was in the spotlight, the user base exploded, and those fears about surveillance became very real for a lot of people.
And in a way, that vindicated the Tor project, right? It showed that the threats they'd been warning about were actually happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it also brought a whole new set of challenges. They had to scale up rapidly to handle all the new users, address security vulnerabilities that were exposed by this increased attention, and try to manage the public perception that Tor was all about the dark web.
Right, it's a whole new ball game.
It's this constant adaptation, this balancing act, that I think makes Tor's story so relevant, even if you're not a techie person. It shows how these questions of privacy, security, control, they're not just abstract ideas. They have real consequences in our lives.
Yeah, they affect all of us.
And speaking of real-world consequences, I thought Collier's discussion of the crypto bro influence on Tor was really insightful. This whole world of cryptocurrency, blockchain, Web3, it's brought a lot of new players into the privacy space, and they're not all coming from the same place.
Right. They have their own agendas.
Some people within the Tor community welcome this influx of resources and expertise. They see it as a way to strengthen the project. But others are a lot more cautious. They're worried about compromising Tor's values.
Yeah, I could see that.
Because while there's some overlap between the cypherpunk ethos and the libertarian ideals often associated with the crypto world, there are some fundamental differences too. The cypherpunks were really driven by this desire for social change, for empowering the individual against powerful institutions.
Whereas some in the cryptosphere seem more focused on disrupting traditional systems for their own benefit.
Exactly. And that tension is playing out right now. How does Tor, this project born from this idealistic vision of a free and private internet, how does it navigate a world that's increasingly dominated by financial interests?
It's a good question, and one that's not easy to answer.
Collier doesn't necessarily give us a definitive answer, but he does a fantastic job of laying out the complexities. And for me, that's what makes this book so valuable. It's not just about the technical details of Tor, it's about the human stories, the ethical dilemmas, this constant push and pull between different forces. It reminds us that technology is never neutral. It's always shaped by the people who create it, use it, and try to control it.
Right, and those are lessons that apply to every aspect of our digital lives.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the world of Tor.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
We've covered a lot of ground. From onion routing to the dark web, from the cypherpunks to the crypto bros. But the main takeaway, for me at least, is that Tor's story is ultimately a story about people.
Right, about the people who created it, the people who use it, the people who are fighting to protect it.
Exactly. It's a story about our fundamental rights as individuals in the digital age. Our right to privacy, our right to freedom of expression, our right to control our own data. And it's a story that's still being written. So if you're interested in learning more about Tor, about online privacy, about the future of the internet, I highly recommend checking out Ben Collier's book. It's called Tor, appropriately enough.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to pick up a copy.
It's a fascinating and timely read. And it's a reminder that the fight for privacy is a fight worth fighting. It's a fight that we all have a stake in. So stay curious, stay informed, and stay private. We'll see you next time on Revise and Resubmit.